Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here. Most of the stories we tell on this channel involve a woman, sometimes a business, sometimes a piece of land with a title that turned out to mean nothing. But every now and then, we get a story that starts somewhere different. Starts with a spreadsheet, of all things. A retired man, a calculator, and a very logical plan. His name is Harley. He's 61 years old, from Pensacola, Florida. Spent 34 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler. One of those guys who kept America moving while the rest of us slept. When he finally retired, he did what practical men do. He ran the numbers. Looked at what he had coming in, looked at what things cost, and started searching for a place where the math worked out in his favor. He found the Philippines. Now, Harley's story isn't the loudest one we've told on this channel. Nobody stole his identity. Nobody disappeared overnight with a suitcase full of cash. What happened to Harley is quieter than that, and in some ways harder to sit with, because he found something real over there. And he still came out the other side with a lot less than he started with. We've heard a lot of these stories over the years, and we put together a guide based on what keeps coming up. It's linked in the description if you want it before you go. Here's Harley's story, in his own words. I turned in my CDL medical card on a Tuesday. Nothing special about that particular Tuesday. It was October. Little bit of cloud cover. Gas was high. I drove my personal truck back to Pensacola, stopped at a Waffle House on I-10, had the same thing I always ordered, and that was that. 34 years. Done. People ask if it was emotional. I don't know what to tell them. I sat in the parking lot of my credit union for about 20 minutes afterward. Not crying, not celebrating, just sitting. Engine off. And the quiet was. It was different than I expected. I'd spent 3 decades looking forward to quiet, and when I finally got it, I couldn't figure out what to do with my hands. I had $24,000 in savings. I had $1,340 a month coming in from Social Security, which kicked in early because of some back issues I'd been dealing with the last few years on the job. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Pensacola I'd been renting for 11 years, and I want to be clear about something. I liked that apartment fine, but I'll tell you this. I never hung a single picture on those walls. Not one. And it wasn't because I was lazy about it. It was because I was never there long enough to bother. You don't decorate a truck stop. You just pass through. My son lives up in Bend, Oregon. My daughter's outside Austin. Good kids. Their mother raised them, mostly, because I was running routes. I don't say that to make myself sound like a victim. I chose the road, and the road paid the bills, and their mother did what their mother did. But somewhere in those years, the calls just got less frequent. Holidays got complicated. You miss enough of them. You become a guest at your own family's table, and eventually people stop setting the extra place. I understood it. I just didn't have a solution for it. So there I was, 61 years old. No property, because you can't buy a house when you're never in one city long enough to justify it. No pension beyond what the government sends, and $1,340 a month in Pensacola, Florida. In 2023, I'll tell you what that is. That's ramen and skipping the dentist. That's turning the AC off during the day when you're home because the electric bill matters. I wasn't destitute, but I was looking at 25 years of that and thinking, there has to be a better configuration for this. I started watching YouTube late at night, the way you do when you can't sleep and the apartment's too quiet. I don't even remember what the first video was. Something about living cheap in Southeast Asia. I watched Thailand videos for a while. Beautiful country. But the script looked like math I couldn't read. And after 30 years of needing to know what a highway sign said before I could take the exit, That bothered me more than I expected. Vietnam was similar. Beautiful. And same problem with the language wall. Then the Philippines kept coming up. Budget retirement threads, expat forums, Facebook groups full of guys who looked a lot like me, talking about how far their money went. And the thing that kept appearing in every single one of those conversations was English. The Philippines runs on English. Road signs, menus, bank forms, doctor's offices. A Kano walks in somewhere, and there's a reasonable chance the person behind the counter speaks his language. For a man who navigated 34 years of trucking by knowing exactly what every sign meant, that mattered. I built a spreadsheet. I do that. Always have. When I was planning long routes, I'd map out fuel stops, rest requirements, way stations. Same brain, different problem. Rent in Mandaue or Lapu-Lapu, that's over near Cebu City, ran about 12 to 15,000 pesos a month. That's around $210 to $265 at the exchange rate I was looking at. Food, if you're eating local, Carinderia food, market food, not importing your habits from back home, maybe 8,000 pesos, call it $140. Utilities, transport, the odd San Miguel beer on a Friday night, another 5,000, roughly $88. I added a buffer, came out to around $500 a month for a decent, functional life. My $1,340 coming in, $500 going out. That's $840 breathing room, every single month. I sat with that number for a while. In Pensacola, $840 breathing room meant one car repair away from broke. In Cebu City, $840 a month was a margin I hadn't had in years. And even if I spent conservatively into my savings on top, say $200 a month for travel, for unexpected things, my $24,000 lasted 10 years easy. By which point I'd be 71, the math would have changed anyway, and at least I'd have had 10 years that didn't taste like ramen and rationing. I called my daughter in Austin and told her what I was planning. She went quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means she's choosing her words. She asked if I'd really thought it through. I told her I'd built a spreadsheet. She said that wasn't quite what she meant. I took that as a yes. I booked a one-way flight out of Tampa, February 2024. I figured I'd try 6 months, see how the body and the budget handled it, adjust from there. That's how I'd always driven. You don't plan the whole route in detail before you leave. You just know your destination, and you figure out the stops as you go. The heat hit me the second I walked out of Mactan Airport. That particular kind of wet heat that doesn't just sit on you, it gets inside your shirt and stays there. A guy from the guest house picked me up. Small Kia van, a little statue of the Virgin Mary on the dashboard, Santo Niño hanging from the mirror. He asked me if it was my first time. I said it was. He said I'd either love it or go home in a week. I checked into the guest house in Mandaue, took a cold shower, lay on the bed under the ceiling fan, and listened to the neighborhood settle into evening. Somewhere down the street somebody had a karaoke machine going. Roosters that apparently had no idea what time of day it was. A tricycle putting by on the road outside. And the quiet from Pensacola. The quiet I'd been carrying around for months, like something I didn't know what to do with. It wasn't there anymore. The place was loud and warm and alive in a way that my apartment on its best day had never been. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I noticed it. The research took about 6 months, give or take. I'm not a fast decision-maker by nature. 34 years of long haul, you learn that the guys who make quick decisions are the ones you pass on the side of the road with their hazards on. I started with Mexico. Looked at it seriously for maybe 3 weeks. Too many guys on the forums talking about things I didn't want to deal with. Not trying to be dramatic about it, just practical. I've driven through enough places that looked fine on paper and weren't. Cross that one off, Thailand came up constantly. Beautiful country, from what I could see on YouTube. The food looked good, the cost of living numbers made sense, the weather wasn't so different from Florida. But the language, I kept coming back to the language. The script looked like nothing I'd ever seen, and I don't mean that as criticism. I mean that as a man who navigated by road signs for 3 decades, the idea of living somewhere I couldn't read anything felt genuinely risky. Not uncomfortable. Risky. There's a difference. Vietnam had the same issue, same equation, different country. The Philippines kept coming up in these budget retirement threads, kept appearing in the comments of the videos I was watching. Guys talking about how their money stretched, how the hospitals weren't bad, how the people were friendly toward Americans, and the one thing that separated it from every other option on my list: English. Real English, not tourist English. The Philippines runs on it. Schools, banks, hospitals, street signs, menus. A Kano walks into a mercury drug to buy blood pressure medication, and there's a reasonable chance the woman behind the counter can explain what he's buying. For a man whose entire professional life depended on knowing what a sign said before he could take the exit, that was not a small thing. So I built the spreadsheet. Rent in Mandaue or Lapu-Lapu, that's across the bridge from Cebu City, reasonable neighborhoods, not tourist-priced, was running 12 to 15,000 pesos a month at the exchange rate I was looking at. Call it $210 to $265. Food, if you eat local, carinderia food, wet market produce, rice and fish and vegetables, not trying to import your habits from Pensacola, maybe 8,000 pesos a month, around $140. Transport, utilities, a phone plan, incidentals, another 5,000, roughly $88. I added a cushion line in the spreadsheet. Came out to approximately $500 a month for a functional, decent life. My Social Security was $1,340 a month, $500 going out, $840 left over, every single month. I sat with that number for a while. I want you to understand what $840 breathing room means when you've been living on a $1,340 check in Pensacola, Florida, in 2023. In Pensacola, that's one car repair from broke. That's turning the air conditioning off during the day because the electric bill matters. That's choosing between the dentist and the grocery run, and usually choosing the groceries. In Cebu City, $840 a month surplus was a margin I hadn't had since my best years on the road. And even if I spent into my savings on top, say $200 a month for travel, for unexpected expenses, for whatever came up, my $24,000 lasted 10 years easy, by which point I'd be 71. The math worked from every angle I ran it. I called my daughter in Austin. She's practical, like me, so I gave her the numbers straight. She went quiet for a moment, that particular quiet where I could tell she was deciding how to respond. She asked if I'd really thought this through, and I told her I had a spreadsheet. She said that wasn't quite what she meant. I told her I was going for 6 months to see how the budget and the body held up, and I'd reassess from there. She said, okay, in the way that means, okay, I can't stop you. I took that as a yes. I booked a one-way out of Tampa, February 2024. The heat coming out of Mactan Airport was something I wasn't entirely prepared for, and I'd driven through Louisiana in August. This was different. Wet in a way that gets between your skin and your clothes and stays there. A driver from the guest house picked me up. Small Kia van, air conditioning that worked about 60%, a Santo Niño figurine hanging from the mirror. He asked if it was my first time in the Philippines. I said it was. He nodded like he'd heard that before. He probably had. The guest house in Mandaue was clean, simple, P800 a night, 14s, run by a woman named Nora, who brought me instant coffee every morning whether I asked for it or not. The first few days, I mostly walked. got my bearings, watched how the traffic worked, which is to say, watched how the traffic didn't work the way any traffic I'd ever seen worked, but somehow moved anyway. Jeepneys painted like somebody's fever dream. Tricycles threading gaps that shouldn't exist. The smell of diesel and fish and something frying somewhere nearby at all times. I liked it. I want to be clear about that. I liked it immediately, which surprised me, because I'm not generally a person who takes to new things fast. What I liked most, if I'm being honest, was the Carinderia culture. Little open-front restaurants, plastic stools, laminated menus with photographs, rice with everything, food that cost almost nothing and tasted fine. It reminded me of truck stop diners at 3 a.m. The same basic logic. You sit down, you get fed, nobody asks you anything personal. You pay a small amount and you leave. I'd spent my whole career in those places. The Philippines had a version of them on every block, and that made the whole country feel navigable in a way I hadn't expected. By the end of the first 2 weeks, I had a route. Morning walk, coffee from a sari-sari store on the corner, breakfast somewhere in the neighborhood, afternoon figuring out the local transport situation or wandering toward SMC side if I needed something. Evenings quiet. The karaoke from the house 2 doors down didn't even bother me after a few days. It was noise, but it was warm noise, if that makes sense. It was people enjoying themselves. Hard to resent that. The first morning I woke up in Manduay with no route to run and no delivery window to hit. I just lay there under the ceiling fan and thought, this is fine. Not great, maybe, but fine. For a man who'd been sitting with a particular kind of hollow quiet since October, fine was a step up. I didn't know yet what was 2 blocks away. The Carinderia was 2 blocks from the guest house. I'd walked past it 3 or 4 times in my first week without stopping. It was easy to miss, just a narrow open-front place with a hand-painted sign above the window that said Silog Breakfast, and a list of prices that made me stop and look twice. Pork sinangag, fried egg, rice, P65, about $1.15. I went in on a Thursday morning in my 3rd week, sat on a red plastic stool at a table with a cracked laminate top and a jar of vinegar and soy sauce in the middle. Maravich brought me coffee without asking, set it down, and said the sinangag was good today because the pork was fresh. I said that sounded fine. She nodded and went back behind the counter. That was the whole conversation. I ate, I paid, I left. But I came back the next morning, and the one after that. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly when it shifted from a breakfast habit to something else. It was gradual in the way that most real things are gradual. Not a moment, just a slow accumulation of mornings. She started remembering that I took too much sugar in my coffee, which she found genuinely funny in a way she didn't bother to hide. She'd slide the cup over and give me a look, and I'd add my 2½ spoons anyway, and she'd shake her head. Small thing, but we had a running joke, and I hadn't had a running joke with anyone in a long time. She was 38, widowed 4 years. Her husband's name was Danny. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you say the name of someone you've made peace with. He'd been a construction worker in Davao, fell from scaffolding. She didn't say much more about it, and I didn't ask. She had a son named Kevin, 15, going to a public school nearby. Smart kid, she said, wanted to be an engineer. Her English was better than most people I'd met. Better than good, actually. She'd done 2 years of nursing school before the money gave out. She said this without bitterness, just as a fact about how things had gone. I noticed she still had the habit of explaining things carefully and clearly, the way people do when they're used to being the one in the room who can bridge a gap. By week 4, I was lingering after breakfast. By week 6, I was helping her drag in the plastic stools from out front when she closed up on Saturday afternoons. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It was just, I was there and useful, and she didn't seem to mind. I want to be honest about what I thought this was. I'd read the forums. I knew the stories. I was 61 years old, and I'd been around enough to know that a Western man in Southeast Asia with money in his pocket is not starting from a neutral position. I'd told myself before I got on that plane that I wasn't going to be one of those guys. The ones who show up lonely and get taken apart one emergency at a time. But here's the thing about Maravik. She didn't follow the script. There was no script. She never once, in that first month or the second month, asked me for anything. She made conversation. She laughed at me. She talked about Kevin's school, about the price of pork at the wet market, about a typhoon that had hit her family's province 2 years back, and whether the rebuilt road was holding up. Normal things, human things. She wasn't flirting. That's the word I kept coming back to. She wasn't working an angle I could identify. She was just decent. And I know that sounds like a low bar. She was decent. But when you've been running solo as long as I had, decent felt like a lot. Month 2, she invited me to Sunday Mass at the church 3 blocks over. I told her I hadn't been inside a church since my mother's funeral back in 2009. She said that was okay. It wasn't a requirement. But if I wanted to come, she'd be there at 8. I went, mostly because I didn't have anything else going on at 8 on a Sunday, and partly because, well, I went. The church was full and warm and loud in a way I hadn't expected. Fans running, children everywhere, a priest going at a pace that suggested he'd said this particular Mass approximately 4,000 times. Maravich handed me a program so I could follow along. Her mother was there, a small woman, probably late 60s, careful on her feet. Maravich introduced her as Lola Nena. Lola Nena shook my hand with both of hers and called me Sir, in a way that was completely sincere. No ask, no angle, just a woman grateful that her daughter had a friend who came to Mass. I think about that handshake sometimes. Month 3 is when the money first moved. And I want to be precise about this because the way it happened matters. Maravich mentioned one morning, not in a pointed way, just in the flow of regular conversation, that Kevin's school fees were due and she was figuring out how to cover them. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was wiping down the counter. It came out the way things come out when someone's thinking out loud rather than making a request. The fees were $8,500. About $150? I said, let me cover that. She looked up, genuinely surprised. I don't mean she performed surprise. I mean there was a beat where she didn't know what to do with her hands. She said no, she couldn't ask me to do that. I said she didn't ask, I offered, and there was a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, okay, and thank you, and that Kevin would be grateful. I transferred it to her GCash that afternoon. 8,500 pesos, $150. And I sat there in my guest house room afterward and tried to examine what I was feeling. The way you kick a tire to see if there's air in it. Was I being played? I ran through it. She hadn't asked. The amount was real and verifiable. I'd seen the school paperwork on the counter a week earlier. Hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Kevin was real. The school was real. $150 wasn't going to move my savings in any direction that mattered. But here's what I actually felt. Sitting there on that guest house mattress with the ceiling fan going overhead and the sound of a jeepney somewhere on the street below. I felt useful. Not needed in the desperate sense, just useful. Like I'd solved a small problem that was a real problem for a real person. I hadn't felt that since before I retired. Maybe longer. When your driving routes You're useful in an abstract way. You moved freight from point A to point B. The freight got where it was going, fine. But you don't see the person on the other end. You don't see what the freight was for. This was different. This was a kid going to school. I told myself that was a good feeling to have. I told myself I should be careful with it. I wasn't careful enough. By month 4, we were a thing, I guess. Nobody said so out loud. There was no conversation where we defined it. We just started spending evenings together, sitting in her small rented room in a concrete building off a side street in Mandaue, watching whatever was on TV, some Filipino drama she'd explained to me in shorthand during the commercial breaks. The fan running, her son Kevin at the table doing homework. It was quiet in a way my apartment in Pensacola had never been quiet. That apartment was empty, quiet. This was something else. I met the family gradually, which I now understand was not accidental. These things have a sequence over there, even if nobody announces it. First Lola Nena at church, which I've already told you about. Then Ronnie, the older brother, he came to the Carinderia one Saturday morning, sat down, shook my hand, called me sir, like his mother did, ate a full breakfast, and that was the introduction. He was a fisherman, worked boats out of their home province in Cebu, came to the city occasionally for supplies or family business. Quiet man. Seemed decent. Then Edgar. Edgar was a different story. Edgar showed up about a month later, also at the Carinderia, also apparently by coincidence, though I'm not sure anything in a Filipino family happens entirely by coincidence. He was younger than Ronnie, late 20s, and he had the specific energy of a man who has never quite committed to any particular line of work. Friendly, handsome, good at conversation. Maravich would mention him occasionally, and I noticed she'd get a certain careful look on her face when she did. The look of someone choosing words. I filed that away. Didn't ask about it. Should have asked about it. There was also Girlie, the younger sister, still in the province, in her early 20s. And then Lola Nena, of course, the center of everything. Small woman, sharp eyes, prayers before every meal, blood pressure medication she couldn't always afford. That last part brings me to month 5. Maravich mentioned one morning that Lola Nena's maintenance medications, amlodipine, metformin, the standard stuff for blood pressure and diabetes, ran to about 12,000 harilard a month, 210. She and her sister in Qatar had been splitting it. But the Qatar remittance was late that month. Her sister's employer had delayed payroll, happens sometimes with OFW workers over there, nothing sinister. Maravich wasn't panicking. She was just explaining the situation out loud, the way she'd explained Kevin's school fees. I covered it. 12,000 pesos. $210. I did not think about it for 3 days the way I had with some of the earlier smaller things. I just covered it. Month 6. Ronnie's boat motor. The boat was the family's main provincial income. Catch fish, sell fish. That's the economics. The motor had been going bad for a while and finally gave out. Repair estimate was $22,000, $390. Maravich told me about it on a Tuesday evening. I asked if Ronnie couldn't cover it himself. She explained that the boat being down meant no income, which meant no money coming in to pay for the repair, which is the particular circular trap that fishing families get into. I thought about it for 3 days that time. I covered half, $11,000, $195, and told myself that was reasonable. That I was splitting it, not absorbing it. Edgar, I noticed, did not contribute anything to the motor repair. When I raised that with Maravich in a general way, she said Edgar was between things right now. I said, "What things?" She said, "Just things." I let it go. Month 7. Kevin's school competition trip. New uniform, supplies, registration fee, 6,500, about 150. I didn't hesitate on that one. Kevin was a good kid. He'd started saying hello to me when Maravich brought him by the Carinderia after school. Serious boy, polite. You could see the nursing school in Maravich coming out in him, the way he explained things, the precision of it. So across those months, 5 through 7, I'd put out roughly P41,500, call it $730. Added to the $4,500 from month 3, I was at about $50,000 total, around $880, spread over 5 months, less than $180 per month on top of my regular budget. I was still inside my numbers, technically. Just barely, but technically. Then came month 8, and month 8 is when I understood, for the first time, what it actually meant to be inside this family. Lola Nena had a blood pressure spike, not a stroke. They were clear about that. The doctors at the hospital were clear, but bad enough that they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. Maravich messaged me at the Carinderia, and I went straight to the hospital, a private one on the edge of Mandaue, not the big government hospital, because Maravich said the wait at the government hospital could be dangerous when someone was presenting like that. I sat in the waiting area with Maravich for 4 hours. I want to say something about those 4 hours because I think about them a lot. Not with regret, exactly. Just, I think about them. We sat in those orange plastic chairs in a hospital hallway that smelled like disinfectant and floor polish, and a fan at the end of the corridor pushed the warm air around without cooling anything. And Maravich was scared in the quiet way that people get scared when they've already been through worse, and they know what bad outcomes look like. She didn't cry. She just sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door at the end of the hall. I haven't sat with another person in an emergency in a long time. I don't mean I haven't been around people during difficult times. I mean I haven't been the person someone called. The person who showed up and stayed. 34 years on the road, you're always somewhere else when things go wrong at home. You find out after the fact. You send money if you can. You call. But you're not there. I was there. Lola Nena was fine. Blood pressure stabilized overnight. They discharged her the next morning with an adjusted medication plan. The bill came to P18,500, $325. I paid it at the counter before Maravich could say anything about it. She looked at me afterward in a way I don't know how to describe. Not grateful exactly, something more complicated than that. Like she was trying to figure out what category to put this in. So by the end of month 8, my running total was about P160,500. Call it $1,190 across those 5 months of family assistance. Still within my mental ceiling of what I'd told myself I could afford to be generous with. Still, technically, inside the math. But here's the thing I was not calculating. It wasn't about any one number. It was the shape of the thing. I had become, without anyone announcing it, without any contract or conversation, the financial gap filler for a family of 6. Whatever fell between what they had and what they needed, I was the answer to that equation now. And gaps have a way of getting wider. I knew that, somewhere. I think I did. But I'd also just sat in a hospital hallway for 4 hours and been the person someone needed. And I wasn't ready to give that up. Somewhere around month 8, I moved out of the guest house. 16,500 pesos a month for a small apartment, 2 streets over from Maravich's place. About $290, which was a little higher than my original budget for rent, but still workable given everything else. The guest house had been fine, but I'd been there 7 months, and Nora, the owner, had started looking at me the way people look at furniture that's been in the same spot too long. Time to commit to a proper address. The apartment had a kitchen, a real one, not just a hot plate. Maravich started cooking there on weekends. Sinigang, usually. Pork ribs in that sour tamarind broth that I'd learned to actually like, despite the fact that it would have been completely unrecognizable to me 8 months earlier. Kevin came over sometimes on Sunday afternoons and did his homework at my kitchen table, while Maravich cooked, and I watched whatever was on cable. He'd started calling me Manong Harley. Manong is a respectful term for an older man, kind of like Mr., but warmer. I looked it up to make sure I wasn't misreading it. I was, by every practical measure, woven into this family. I attended Kevin's school recognition event in September. They gave him an award for mathematics, and Maravich cried a little and didn't try to hide it. I sat next to Lola Nena in the folding chairs, and she held my arm during the procession and said something in Cebuano to Maravich that I didn't catch. Maravich translated it later as, "He's a good man, Your Kano." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded. The house came up at a Sunday lunch in late September. Not from Maravich, from Lola Nena. We were at a small gathering at the apartment. Rice, lechon manok, from the Gaisano rotisserie, some vegetable dish Girlie had brought up from the province. Lola Nena said, in the way of someone remembering rather than requesting, that the family had always hoped to build a proper house on the lot in the province. Her husband's lot, Maravich's father's land, inherited, already paid for. The current structure out there was bamboo and old wood, she said. Had been fixed twice already. Every typhoon season they worried. She didn't look at me when she said any of it. She was talking to the room. It was nostalgia, not a pitch. I filed it away and didn't say anything. 2 weeks later, Maravich brought it up directly at the kitchen table after Kevin had gone home. Carefully. She'd done some research. A simple concrete hollow block house, 2 bedrooms, a sala, proper kitchen, basic bathroom, could be built for around $650,000. That was about $1,150. The land was already there, no purchase needed. Her cousin Dante was a licensed contractor, had built houses in the province before, would do the work at cost as a family thing. She had his number. She'd already talked to him. She was clear, and I believed her, that she was not asking me. She was telling me about something she wanted. There is a difference, and she was precise about it. But the implication was there. Of course it was there. I did what I've always done when the road ahead wasn't clear. I pulled over mentally and ran the numbers. The land cost nothing. No purchase needed, and I knew already, I'd read enough forums, that foreigners can't own land in the Philippines anyway. So my name was never going to be on anything regardless. But here's how I thought about it. If this was going to be my long-term situation, if Mandaue was where I was planting whatever flag I had left, then having a house that the family occupied and maintained in the province gave me something. Stability. An investment in the relationship's longevity. An anchor, not a gift. I told myself I wasn't giving them a house. I was buying into a future. I did not call a Philippine attorney. There are attorneys in Cebu who work specifically with expats. I'd seen their names on forums, had even bookmarked one, and I did not call any of them. I thought about it. I told myself I'd do it after I made the decision, which is the kind of logic that sounds reasonable in the moment and doesn't bear much examination afterward. We agreed I'd put in $350,000, $6,200, as a first installment to get construction started. Site clearing, foundation, materials. The remaining $300,000, $5,300, would follow in stages tied to progress. Frame up, roof on, walls done. Dante would provide updates. Maravich would be the point of contact. I would be the funding. I transferred the $350,000 via GCash on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Sat and watched the confirmation screen. 350,000 pesos, $6,200, more than a quarter of what I'd arrived with. I want to tell you I felt doubt. I want to say I had a bad feeling, some gut instinct that kicked in. That would make a better story, probably. But the truth is, what I felt was something closer to relief. Like I'd been moving my whole life and had finally committed to a destination. 34 years of routes and check-ins and fuel stops, and nobody waiting on the other end. And here was a place, an actual physical structure going into the ground that connected me to something permanent. I'm not saying I was right to feel that. I'm saying that's what I felt. The concrete and hollow blocks and rebar were ordered that week. Dante sent Maravich a photo of the materials delivered to the site. She showed it to me over dinner. I looked at it for a long time. A pile of materials on a piece of land I'd never seen, in a province I hadn't visited, being built by a man I'd met once for 20 minutes. But the math said P650,000 was 550,000. And Dante was family, and the land was real. The math said all of that. Construction started in November. Dante came up to the city to meet me properly before the work began. Maravich's cousin, mid-30s, solid handshake, showed me photos on his phone of houses he'd built in the province. Decent-looking structures, concrete hollow block, painted, corrugated roofing, the kind of simple functional houses you see everywhere in provincial Cebu. He had a business card. He spoke English well enough to walk me through a basic timeline. Site clearing in week 1, foundation pour in week 2, hollow blocks going up through December. I went to the site once, in early December. Took a series bus out toward the province. Then a habal-habal for the last stretch. One of those motorcycle taxis where you hold on and try not to think about it. The site was a 40-minute ride from the city into countryside that got greener and quieter the farther you went from Mandaue. Maravich's father's lot was a rectangular piece of land off a barangay road, coconut trees on one side, a neighbor's garden on the other. The old bamboo structure was still standing at the back, and in the front, a real concrete foundation. Freshly poured, still pale gray. Rebar sticking up at the corners. Hollow blocks stacked nearby under a tarp. A couple of workers finishing up for the day. I stood there and looked at it and thought, okay, this is real. This is actually happening. Dante shook my hand and said the frame would be up by January. I took some photos on my phone. Rode the habal-habal back to the highway, feeling better than I had in a while. December slowed everything down. It always does in the Philippines. Christmas starts in September there, the Burr months, but December itself gets serious. Dante had other jobs to finish before year-end. Workers had province commitments. There was a Sinulog festival coming in January that Maravich wanted to attend. Things paused. I told myself that was normal. Construction always has gaps. January. Dante messaged Maravich. Cement prices had gone up significantly since the original quote. She showed me the message, translated the relevant part. He needed an additional $80,000 to continue, about $1,400. Without it, he couldn't order the next materials delivery. I was frustrated. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't just quietly accepting this. I sat with it for a few days. I asked Maravich to ask him for documentation on the price increase. She asked. He sent a screenshot from a hardware supplier. I looked at it on her phone screen. I don't read Cebuano, and I couldn't fully verify it, but the numbers looked plausible, and the supplier name matched one I'd seen on the materials delivery receipt from November. I was in $350,000 already. Stopping meant losing all of it. Paying the extra $80,000 meant having a chance of getting something out the other end. I paid it. February is when Dante went quiet. 3 weeks of nothing. No updates, no photos. Maravich said he had a family situation, something about a sick child. She wasn't sure of the details. I said okay, and then 2 more weeks passed, and I said I wanted to go to the site. We went on a Saturday morning. Same bus, same hobble-hobble, same barangay road. I could tell from Maravich's silence on the ride that she was worried, though she didn't say so. The gate to the lot was padlocked. We looked through the gap in the fence. The concrete slab was there. The first course of hollow blocks, maybe 20 centimeters of wall above the foundation, was there, same as December. The stack of remaining hollow blocks under the tarp was smaller than I remembered. No workers, no materials I hadn't seen in December. Nothing had moved in weeks, possibly months. I stood there for a long time looking at that slab. It's a specific kind of feeling, recognizing a road you've been on before. Not déjà vu. More like that moment on a night drive when you realize you've been heading the wrong direction for a while, and there's no good place to turn around for the next 60 miles. You're not panicking. You're just assessing, figuring out the damage, what you've already burned, and what you might still be able to salvage. We arranged to meet Dante the following week. He came to the apartment, sat at my kitchen table, and was apologetic in a very specific way. The way of a man who is genuinely sorry and also has no money and also cannot entirely account for where the money went. He mentioned permit complications. He mentioned the price increases again. He mentioned a possibility of restarting in 2 weeks if he could resolve an outstanding debt to the block supplier. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. I sat down with a notebook. Not a spreadsheet this time. A paper notebook, the kind I used to keep in the cab for route notes and expense tracking. I wrote down every peso I had sent since February 2024. Kevin's school fees, Lola Nena's medications, half of Ronnie's boat motor, Kevin's competition trip, the hospital bill, the apartment deposit, the construction installment, the cement price increase, everything, line by line. Then I converted it, column by column, pesos to dollars. The total was $883,500, approximately $15,600 over 14 months. I checked my credit union balance on my phone. $8,200. Started with $24,000. I sat with those 2 numbers for a while. The notebook open on the table, the ceiling fan turning overhead, somebody's rooster starting up outside even though it was mid-afternoon. And roosters in the Philippines apparently don't know or care what time it is. There was no other man. No secret I discovered. No phone I found. No dramatic reveal. Just a notebook, and a number that didn't match the life I thought I was building. I brought the notebook to Maravich that evening, set it on the table between us. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she cried. Quietly. The way she did everything quietly. She told me the truth, as best she could. Dante had borrowed against the anticipated progress payments before the work was done. Used some of it for his own family debts. The construction money wasn't stolen exactly. It had just dispersed into a system of obligations and debts and family needs that she hadn't fully seen until it was too late. And by the time she understood what was happening, she was too ashamed to tell me, and too deep in to know how to fix it. She said, "I'm sorry, Harley. I'm very sorry." I believed her. I still do. That's the part 1, keep turning over. She was sorry. She was ashamed. And the money was still gone. I told Maravich the next morning. Not in anger. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a man who raises his voice much. Spent too many years alone in a cab to see the point of it. I just told her plainly, I have $8,200 left, and I need to stop. She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain Dante again, or suggest another path forward, or tell me things would work out if I could just hold on a little longer. She just nodded, and that told me something. It told me she'd been waiting for this conversation for a while. I didn't ask her everything I could have asked. I want to be honest about that, too. There were questions I chose not to put on the table. About Dante, about where exactly the money went, about whether she'd seen this coming before I did, and said nothing. I think I knew the answers would be complicated and partial, and wouldn't give me back a single peso, so I let them go. Some roads you just don't go down. The relationship didn't end in a scene. There was no confrontation, no bags packed, no door slammed. It faded the way things fade when the money stops, and both people know it. She came by the apartment twice in the following weeks, both times about Kevin. Once because he had a school thing coming up, once just to talk. By the third week, she stopped coming by. I didn't message her. She didn't message me. 6 weeks after that conversation at the kitchen table, we were done, without ever saying so out loud, which, I'd learned, is very much how things end over there. Direct confrontation avoided. Problems left unspoken, until they're just gone. I moved to Lapu-Lapu. Smaller apartment, $2,500 a month, about 185. One room, a bathroom, a narrow kitchen. Noisier neighborhood, more tricycles, a basketball court across the street where teenage boys played until 10 at night. I didn't mind the noise anymore by then. I rebuilt the spreadsheet. Rent, $185. Food, eating local, $130. Utilities, transport, phone, incidentals, $80. Total, $395 a month. My Social Security check is $340. That leaves me $945, not the $840 I'd started with. Better, actually, because I'd gotten smarter about where I was living and what things actually cost once you stopped making generous decisions. I have $200 in savings. That's not a comfortable medical buffer for a man in his 60s. I know that. It keeps me up sometimes at 3 a.m. when the basketball court is finally quiet. But Florida on $8,200 and a Social Security check is a different problem than the Philippines on the same. Here the math still runs, just with less margin than I planned. I think about Maravich, not with bitterness. I want to be specific about that, because I know how these stories usually land, and I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. She was real. The warmth was real. The Sunday lunches, and the hospital waiting room, and Kevin's math award, and Lola Nena calling me good man. All of that was real. None of it was performance. But she was the eldest daughter of a family with no safety net, in a country where that job title carries obligations that don't stop just because a Kano moved in and complicated things. The money I sent didn't go to a villa somewhere. It went to medications and school fees and a fishing boat motor and a construction cousin who borrowed against a future that never arrived. The system pulled it in, the way those systems do, and Maravich was inside the system same as I was. She just knew its rules better than I did, and she used what she had available. I don't excuse it. I also can't simplify it into something clean. I eat breakfast most mornings at a carinderia on a side street in Lapu-Lapu, maybe 4 blocks from my apartment. Different place than the one where I met Maravich. Different owner, different plastic stools, different hand-painted menu. The sinangag is fine. The coffee comes with too much sugar already in it, which I don't complain about because it means I don't have to ask. I go alone. I eat. I watch the street. Sometimes I read something on my phone. Sometimes I just sit. It's okay. Not great. Not what I drew up on the spreadsheet 16 months ago. But okay. And I want you to understand that okay, from where I was sitting, in that Pensacola apartment, with no pictures on the walls, is not a small thing. Here's what I'd tell someone who's where I was 2 years ago, watching YouTube at midnight and running numbers on their phone. The math is real. The Philippines is genuinely cheaper than where you're coming from, and the people are genuinely warm, and English genuinely works, and your social security check genuinely goes further here than it does back home. None of that is a lie, but set a number before you land. Decide, before you get on the plane, what you can afford to lose, not invest, lose, and call that your tuition budget. Because something will be tuition. You will pay to learn things you could not have learned any other way. That's not unique to the Philippines. That's just how it works when you move somewhere new at 61 with a heart that's been quiet for a long time and suddenly isn't. The Philippines doesn't lie to you. It just shows you what you wanted to see. And you pay for the viewing. That's Harley's story. What strikes us here at Inside the Philippines, hearing accounts like his, is how rarely they look like the stories people expect. No dramatic fraud. No disappeared woman. No screaming match at an airport. Just a man who found something genuine, got pulled into a system he didn't understand, and came out the other side with less money and more wisdom than he started with, and chose to stay anyway. The family obligation Harley ran into isn't theater. Utang na loob, the weight an eldest daughter carries for her whole family, the expectation that someone with resources will share them. These are not invented for the benefit of foreign visitors. They're the real architecture of how Filipino families survive. Western men who arrive without understanding that architecture aren't being deceived so much as they're navigating without a map. If you're thinking about retiring in the Philippines on a modest income, there are things worth knowing before you go. How the visa options actually work, what the SRRV really costs and requires, what legal protections exist and don't exist around property and construction, and what to ask before you hand money to anyone for anything involving land. Stories like Harley's are part of why we put together a guide on this channel. Everything we've learned from the people who've sat down and told us what they wished they'd known, all in one place. It's linked in the description if it's something you need. Harley is still in Lapu-Lapu, still eating breakfast, still running numbers. The math still works. Thanks for watching Inside the Philippines. We'll see you on the next one.